going on, football fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and prop preview for Monday Night Football between the Lions and the Ravens. We've got a high total, 2 Super Bowl contending teams, so it should be an absolute banger of a slate, and you're going to make sure you're ready for all of your exposure tonight. But first off, we'll look at the DFS side and how I'm handling my Draftkings lineups. That'll include a look at the strategy, some of the stacking options that you have for this single game, and considering that Sunday went absolutely fantastic for us, a near GPP takedown in the big $5 150 backs, let's keep that momentum and see what we can do here on Monday. And then afterwards, we're going to focus on the pick'em and the prop side of things with some props and Underdog and Prize Picks that have already entered, and of course, also a single game parlay for the Monday Night Football and Hardrock bet that have entered as well. So by the end, you'll have a pretty good sense for how to attack the slate, a little bit game plan for all of your exposure. And without further ado, we've got a lot to go through here. It started off, first off, a look at that DFS side. Before we start going player by player, let's set the table when it comes to script, because we do have a 4-point spread here slightly favoring Baltimore. They're the home team too, so I would expect more lineups to go in that direction if they're going to stack. But there's going to be a lot of 3-3s, and the reason I say that is over a 50-point total. When you have two competent offenses that are going head-to-head, so many premier skill position players on both sides of the ball, people are really going to prioritize that kind of build. And what that looks like in practicality with a 3-3 is a quarterback from either side, a receiver or two, maybe a running back sneaking in there, but not a whole lot of kickers, not a whole lot of defenses, some of your like backup running backs, tight ends, that kind of stuff. You're hardly going to see in those kind of builds. So if you want to get different tonight, going to a 4-2 or a 5-1 for either team would instantly start to get you towards that. But if you're going to play that 4-2 or a 3-3, just make sure that you're putting in some unique players, whether that's some of the backups, some of the more differentiated value plays towards the bottom end of the board. You're going to have to force your hand when it comes to that differentiation. Now, I don't disagree with the fact that this should be a close competitive game, so that kind of game script I'm going to be playing quite a bit. It's just not on the large scale GPPs. If I'm playing against 50 to 100,000 other entries, I don't want to be sharing the same kind of lineup construction as nearly half of that field, because in a 100,000 entry contest, that's 50,000 other people that I'm going to have to beat. So if I'm playing in the big GPPs, which I will be, I always do for these kind of showdown slates, it's going to be trying to force my hand with that game script. And I think anything Lions heavy, because they are the slate underdogs tonight, a 4-2 or God forbid a 5-1 in that direction is going to be extremely different to the rest of the field. So large field single entries, I'll be building a little bit differently than in my large field GPP lineups because of that ownership that we're seeing. But let's start up top with Lamar Jackson at $11,800, who's extremely expensive, but on a showdown slate is always a priority. He's got the rushing upside, the passing upside to get there as well. So while you don't have to use him alongside with pass catchers, it is typically a good idea. I mean, especially over the last few seasons where he's ramped up that passing production. You've wanted to have a Zay Flowers, a Mark Andrews, maybe a Bateman or DeAndre Hopkins at wide receiver along with him in most cases, but there have been a few showdown slates where he's gone there on his own. And that's typically when he'll go for over 100 rushing yards, maybe a rushing touchdown or two on top of that as well. That's the kind of game script that you need if he's going to get there at captain by himself. But like I said, a majority of my exposure will have him along with at least one pass catcher, and at over a 2x points per dollar value, he is by far the best spent up that we have on the slate. So combined ownership is about 75%, also the highest owned player that we have there, but it's well deserved. And if anything, he's going to be in close to 100% of my lineups tonight, and that includes some of those 4-2, maybe even the 5-1 lineups that I'm going with on the Lions side. Lamar Jackson may be the only player that I'm using as a buyback, and if it's a 4-2 Lions, him alongside with one of his pass catchers could very well be that buyback, because if they're playing from behind, it's going to be more of that passing side of Lamar that we end up getting tonight, which would be massive for that correlation with this pass catcher. Next up, we got Jahmyr Gibbs at $10,600. He's not my favorite play towards the top of the board. The points per dollar projection is suffering a little bit in comparison to these guys around him. However, he's lower owned than a lot of those other players, and in 4-2 or 5-1 Lions lineups, he's got a great chance to get there. And that, of course, is because in those kind of game scripts where the Lions are dominating the game, he's going to get more usage, more snaps, more rushes out of the backfield, which is massive for that projection. So while the points per dollar median projection really doesn't stand out here, his ceiling is just as high as Lamar Jackson. It's in fact even higher than some of these other skill positions that we have just below him. So I like a Jahmyr Gibbs for that, but I am using him at the captain position only in those 4-2 or those 5-1 lineups. If we're going with a Ravens heavy lineup or even a 3-3 between two teams, I don't know if Jahmyr Gibbs is my preferred captain in that kind of scenario. I'd rather go to a Lamar Jackson, a Derrick Henry, who we'll talk about here in just a second, are the players that I'm using in most of those kind of lineups. And Amon-Ra St. Brown is $10,400. Also doesn't really stand out with the points per dollar projection, and I would argue that he's a little bit expensive for what he's done here in 2025. Even towards the very end of 2024, his production wasn't as elite as what it was the year before that, and a lot of that is because of Jameson Williams. Not even Amon-Ra's fault. It's just that Jameson has really started to stand out on the other side of that offense. Now you add in a Tesla, you've got Sam Laporta starting to take away some of that usage as well. That's the reason for the slight downtick in production, but he's still one of the best players that we have on this kind of slate. It's just that at the 45, nearly 50% ownership mark, it feels like he's getting the kind of love that he deserves. So I don't love the play, I don't hate the play either. I'm definitely going to have him in some of my lineups, but he won't be one of my core plays towards the top end of the board. And I will say though, if you're playing with a Ravens heavy lineup, that a PPR heavy wide receiver like Amon-Ra is massive as a buyback option, because on a full PPR site like Draftkings, he could get you those 9 to 10 catches, maybe 120 yards, doesn't even have to score a touchdown, and can get to the optimal lineup that way. Next up, we got Derrick Henry, who's probably my favorite play on the slate. Lamar Jackson, the best projecting player that we have, but Derrick Henry a bit lower owned at only about 37.5% at the flex position. And I think the best place to use him would be at the captain spot, because when Derrick Henry gets it going, when he starts going off for a touchdown or two, those 50, 60 yarders like we see him do pretty much every other week during the NFL season, he tends to chain those together. He gets that bowling ball moving, the defense starts to wilt out there in the second half. So when he has his big games, it's oftentimes 25 to 30 points, which at captain would certainly pay off with that kind of price tag. And while Lamar Jackson is more of my cash/single entry captain in large scale GPPs, or even in some of the smaller GPPs, I really like the correlation that we're getting with the Henry. And at that captain position, I'll be using him in mostly 4-2 or 5-1 Ravens lineups for him to get the kind of production that we're hoping for and the kind of volume that you need to be the optimal captain. They're going to have to be playing from ahead, or at least in a competitive sort of game script. If the Ravens start playing from behind, though, that's when Derrick Henry often gets ripped off the field. And we'll talk about Justice Hill, who of course is the one who ends up coming onto the field when they're playing from behind. But these Ravens running backs are heavily script dependent. In fact, if I'm going with a 4-2 Lions or a 5-1 Lions lineup, there's little to no chance that I'll be using a Derrick Henry as a buyback. Next up, we got Jared Goff here at $9,400. A decent price tag, 1.8x points per dollar value. So compared to some of these other players on top of them, he's the better cash play if you're looking for that kind of a option. But you do have to use him with a pass catching option. Unlike a Lamar Jackson, who has that rushing upside, he has essentially no rushing upside that he's bringing to the table. And in fact, if you're using him at captain, which I don't plan on using him at that spot for tonight, you want to have at least 2, maybe even 3 pass catchers along with him. Because if he's going to score 20 to 25 fantasy points, which is what he's going to need at the very least to get to the optimal tonight, 50 something point total. It's not going to be like a 18 fantasy point performance that's getting you to the optimal captain. He's going to have to bring on at least 2 of those 3 wide receivers. So he's a solid option. I'm mostly using him as a buyback or at a flex position with some of those Lions heavy lineups. Not my favorite captain in my opinion. Next up, we got Zay Flowers at $8,400. Points per dollar projection is the best of any of these spend ups. In fact, even a better projection than Lamar Jackson. So $8,400, you could argue, is way too cheap for what he's shown here in 2025. And he's the clear alpha dog that you have on this offense. And he's a PPR monster as well. Gets a lot of targets, a lot of those shorter ADOT targets as well. He mixes it in nicely. He's got those long targets and the shorter targets mixed in. So kind of like an Amon-Ra St. Brown, he could be a fantastic buyback option if you're going with a Lions heavy offense. Just kind of like the flip of what you get with an Amon-Ra, but he's way cheaper. And based on the production so far this year, Zay Flowers has been the better wide receiver. He's got the better yak ability. He's a little bit more explosive than Amon-Ra is. I'm not saying that Amon-Ra is old or anything, but Zay Flowers just has more of that giddy up to him than, the other wide receiver. And he's cheaper, significantly cheaper than what you have on that side. So I really like him in that sort of scenario. But even if you're just going with a pass catching option for Lamar Jackson, he makes plenty of sense there as well. Next up, we got Jameson Williams at $8,000. Also pretty cheap, but he's got a really low floor. So this is what's interesting about a Jameson, is I think he's a fantastic large hill GPP play, because when he gets there, it's usually with a big play touchdown. I mean, that's the kind of wide receiver that he is. He's fast, big bodied, probably can contend, some of those jump balls in the red zone. But because of that big play reliance and because you're not always going to connect on some of those targets way down the field, he's got a close to zero floor. So if you're looking for a safe play in this sort of range, you're not going to a JMO here. It's more so the large field GPP upside that you're hoping for. So if you're playing in a single entry, even some of the smaller field GPPs where you don't have to have the absolute nuts, you probably stay away from this sort of an option. But as you can see here in the captain position, I'll be using them in the large field GPPs because kind of like a Derrick Henry, when he has those big games, it's oftentimes 20 plus fantasy points. And at $8,000, he's got the kind of upside to crack the slate open. So I'll be using them in a lot of those 150 max kind of formats. Not so much when I have a higher dollar contest that I'm entering. By the way, guys, if you guys want to download these sheets for yourself with all the updated projections throughout the day, this is just early on a Monday. These will change quite a bit throughout the rest of the afternoon. It includes all my ownership projections, projected points to use in your optimizers when building your lineups. I've also got my entire player pool over there. This will also be updated quite a bit as we get closer to lock. A lot of that adjusting to the changes in ownership projections that we're going to get, but also all the script notes that tells you exactly how I'm using all of these players in my lineups, my core plays, the players that I'm getting well over the field on and using in my high dollar stuff. And then the absolute nuts over here, which I can't give away for free here on YouTube really ever, is the extra notes player tab. This is where I go through all the strategy involved with these players. Not every single player is going to have a massive description for it, but the players that have the most leverage on the slate, the ones that are the most important when it comes to this game, I break down and make sure that you have all the information that you need for the slate. So you of course saw that I had a pretty good Sunday over there. A lot of my members did too. We had all the value plays locked down, really good high upside quarterback stacks mixed in there as well. For all that content for Showdown here, we had that for main slate yesterday and for the rest of the NFL season. Join the NFL DFS tier. There's a link down below to go out there and join that. It's only $15 a month. Absolute steal for all the content that I provide. And it's for all the big slates. It's the same as what you get on all these other massive sites that are costing you hundreds of dollars a month for your projections. It should not cost you thousands of dollars a year just to get your projections for NFL DFS. When you've got to pay entry fees, you've got to pay to rake on these sites on top of it. It just makes it completely unsustainable. So that's really the mission with my channel here, is to be able to provide projections at a much lower rate, what is, I think, a lot more reasonable for a lot of the other people out there. Still give you the same, if not better quality projections in a lot of cases. I think it's a lot higher quality, but I'm slightly biased. So obviously I like to say that I have the best, but we're working on it, getting there over time, right? There's only one person on the team over here and it helps support the channel as well. So make sure to check that out if you guys haven't already. We're kicking ass to start here in 2025 and only going to continue that here over the next few months. Next player we got to talk about here would be a David Montgomery at $6,200, who is extremely script dependent, because David Montgomery really only gets the usage you need to pay off the $6,000 price tag if they're playing from ahead. So unless there's an injury to Jahmyr Gibbs, that'd be the other way for him to get that kind of usage. I don't love him, and because I slightly agree with the Ravens leading, I think I would even bet them at that -4 mark. I'm probably not going to have that much David Montgomery, but if you are somebody in the large field GPPs that plans on going with a lot of 4-2 or 5-1 Lions lineups, David Montgomery should be a part of your exposure. And in fact, I still plan on using some of those 4-2s in my large field GPPs, as we've already mentioned. So I might even have to add some David Montgomery into my player pool. Even if I do, it'll be either matching the field or slightly under the field that I go with on my exposure, but still somebody that has a lot of utility if you're playing for that kind of outcome. Next up, we got a Sam Laporta here at $5,400. He's got a 10.8 point projection, a 2x points per dollar projection as well. So the quote unquote safe option that you have in this middle tier. So if you're looking for that kind of cash play or maybe like a single entry option, you go with Sam Laporta over David Montgomery all day. But the ceiling potential between these two players is about the same as well. So given the fact that Laporta is so much higher owned, he's about 5 to 6% higher owned at flex. He's about double the ownership at the captain position as well. You know, if I was playing in the large field GPPs, David Montgomery is probably the better option. But if you want to prioritize projection, you want to prioritize the efficiency of your price tag, you're probably using him in those smaller field contests instead. Next up, we got the two kickers who have finally started to get a little bit more expensive. I've been a huge proponent of these kickers the entire season, and that's really not going to change at this point. Both are just about $5,000. I think they should be $5,500 to $6,000 in most cases. And the ownership is also a bit higher than what we've had in some of these recent slates, but only about 20% combined ownership is far too low. So I'm going to have both of these kickers, as you can see in my exposure to the right. I'll probably have them at about 30% of my lineup, so a good amount of both of these, especially with over the 50-point total. That means that there's going to be a lot of scoring, points after touchdown opportunities, of course, kicking opportunities if they can't punch it into the end zone, which is massive for this sort of format. Next up, we got DeAndre Hopkins at $4,800. D-Hop had a really big week 2, so I think that's why the price tag's here at $4,800. But a few things to kind of warn you about with him. He only played 18% of snaps in week number 2. You had Bateman play 59% of the snaps. You had Tylan Wallace, not a name you probably expected to see here, play 50% of the snaps. So while DeAndre Hopkins got the 2 really big touchdowns, or 2 really big plays, I should say, they're going to make everyone want to click him here. I don't think that's sustainable whatsoever. Is he going to do that a couple times this year? For sure. But he's $4,800. He's way more expensive than he probably should be. And unless you're playing in a large field GPP format where those big play touchdowns and that kind of upside matters, you want to stay away from him in most cases. So I'm not going to be using DeAndre Hopkins tonight, even in my large field GPP exposure, just because there's so many other players around him that I'd rather use. Speaking of, Mark Andrews is one of those options, and we're going to go ahead and actually just lump him with a Rashad Bateman at $4,000. Both are at a 2.3x points per dollar projection, which is excellent for a value play. And in fact, if you're playing in some of those smaller field contests, any cash lineups, it's one of these 2 that you're using for your value, if not both of them together in that sort of lineup. They're by far the safest plays that we have here towards the bottom. And Mark Andrews, by the way, gets the benefit of Isaiah Likely still being out for the Ravens. So he's going to be the number 1 tight end. You will have Charlie Kolar, who'll play some snaps for the Ravens. You can see in my GPP exposure, I'm going to be using him as a value play in a few cases, only probably about 3 to 5% though. So I'm not going overboard there. Mark Andrews gets a massive uptick though. He's going to be playing almost all the snaps, probably at least 75, 80%. He's going to be getting all the target share at the tight end position as well. And in fact, I like him enough to even use him at the captain position, because at captain, he's only $6,600 and lets you use all the spend ups that you want at the top of the board. So it's not always what you're getting at that $6,600 price tag. It's what it opens up elsewhere. And that is certainly the case with the Mark Andrews lineup. Rashad Bateman, I already mentioned, I like him quite a bit. Both of these players, though, it's worth noting, are going to be significantly higher owned than some of their counterparts. The defenses, so if you're going to go with one of those 4-2 or 5-1 lineups, I haven't yet decided on whether I'm going to use these defenses or not, but not a lot of people are going to get there with over the 50-point total. What about 9% combined ownership on our Ravens, about 7% combined on the Lions. So, even if you throw them in just 15% of your lineups, that would be leverage in both cases. Tylan Wallace, I'm probably going to end up playing him or Justice Hill. I'm going to add one of these 2 to my player pool. Looks like a lot more people are going to a Justice Hill, who, like I said before, is very much so script dependent. He's the kind of player that sees the field a lot more when the Ravens are playing from behind. So, in the lineups where I'm going with a 4-2 Lions stack, Justice Hill could be one of those 2 buybacks that I use, maybe him, and then a Lamar Jackson. However, a Tylan Wallace here is only 3% owned. And like I said, guys, he played half the snaps last time out, which is not the usual for him. He's not usually playing those kind of snaps, so I don't know if he's earned that role or what happened in week 2 for him to be playing that many snaps. But at $3,000, he's somebody that you can consider that is going to see the field at least a little bit. Now, I don't think he's going to play 50% of snaps tonight. I've got him at closer to a 25 to 30% snap share. But with his big playability, he's shown us in a few showdown slates over the last few seasons the ability to score a 50 to 60-yard touchdown. That's what he has to do to pay off this sort of price tag. So isn't currently in my player pool. We'll have to see which one of these 2 ends up finding their way in. But both have upside depending on the game script you're playing. And by the way, this Ravens script, it would also, if they're playing from behind, help out Tylan Wallace, because if they're playing from behind, they're going to go with more 3 wide receiver sets as opposed to 2 tight end sets, like you see the Ravens do quite often. And in those scenarios, that's where Wallace is actually going to see the field. They've got a Brock right here, so backup tight end for Detroit. They play a lot of 2 tight end sets, so he does see the field, but he's pretty much touchdown or bust at $2,400. Khalif Raymond has not been playing nearly as much because Tesla has taken away a lot of those snaps, but he does play at a lot of the gadget plays, and he's a very shifty yards after catch wide receiver. So if he gets a big play touchdown, that would be his avenue there as well. I prefer the guys like a Tesla that looks like an absolute stud. I mean, he makes a game-changing catch, an absolute stunning catch seemingly every single time that he plays. And then Charlie Kolar, because he'll be playing with a likely injury, is somebody that I would be using down towards the bottom. But I've got to admit, guys, most of my value is going to be on like a Mark Andrews or a Bateman. Like, I'm going to be eating the chalk in a lot of cases down here because, I mean, their projection just dwarfs all the other players that you have around them. And then this Justice Hill chalk down here is maybe the one piece of value chalk that I maybe don't believe in because it's so script dependent on the Ravens having to play from behind. And given the Ravens being those -4 favorites, I don't know if that's something that we should really be relying on. So hopefully that helps set the table for what we have here in the Showdown slate tonight. Again, guys, check out the Patreon page if you guys haven't already. Help support the channel. Everything we're doing here on free on YouTube, and it gives you all the extra content behind the paywall. And now for the pick'em and prop side of things, where last time out with our main slate exposure ended up going pretty well. We ended up cashing out on the first slip between the LA Rams and the Eagles. Ended up being a barn burner in the second half. AJ Brown getting all of his catches there for us, which was pretty clutch. And we also cashed out on the Ashton Genty over on rushing yards. So it was a profitable Sunday for my exposure outside of that. Slightly into the positive. Not a massive Sunday by any means, but we'll take the profit. And now we're up over 20 units for the year so far. So we can see if we can end out Monday Night Football with a bang, add further units on top of that. And with that being said, let's go through the two props that I like for tonight. So they have bumped a little bit on Prize Picks Underdog. Not to fret though on the sports books. We can still take them at the lines that I took, or at least closer to it. But where I took it was on Prize Picks. So it was an over on Henry at 84.5 rushing yards and an over on Jared Goff at 34.5 passing attempts. Now this is a 3x payout. I don't think this is the worst payout or worst prop value they can get on these two. So I would still even potentially enter it, but there is a better place to enter it later on. So this is a 3x payout. Let's first off talk about why I like these two props. Underdog, by the way, you can get the same lines except Jared Goff is 0.5 lower, which is the line that I got, but I got it at even money, not with this 8.87x multiplier. So this is what, 2.61x with the payout. So that's probably not ideal. The place to enter it is over here on the sports book. So you can see on Hardrock Bet, I entered it for a 3-leg parlay just to kind of show you guys an example of how you can make this work. If you just go with the bottom two props, those are the ones that I entered on Prize Picks. That's the Derrick Henry over on rushing yards, and then the Jared Goff over on passing attempts. This is an even money prop, even though it's -140 on a lot of the other sports books, at least -130 juice and most of the major books. Derrick Henry's at 86.5 on most of those other books now. I did get him 1 yard lower, but that 1 yard difference hopefully won't make too much of a difference. I'm knocking on wood over here so we don't jinx ourselves too much on that. But if you take those two together, it's plus 230 on Hardrock Bet. That's a better payout, by the way, than what I got on Underdog or Prize Picks. So that's an excellent spot to enter it now. Even with the Henry prop 1 yard higher, I think it's better value at that plus 230. But what we can do as well with the single game parlay on a site like Hardrock Bet is we can add this Ravens to win on top of it, because this is what's massive with this prop, and why I took these three is because the Ravens are favorites and I think they're going to win tonight. I don't even think the 4-point spread's enough. The Lions have not looked as good without Ben Johnson, and the Ravens look like absolute killers so far this season, especially after that comeback. Well, I guess it wasn't great what they had in week 1, but they looked great before the comeback with the Josh Allen spoiling them in week number 1. I expect them to win 13, 14 games this season, and this is one that I expect them to get that dub in as well. So I'm going to take the Ravens to win here, and that's part of the reason I think Derrick Henry is going to go over his rushing yards attempt. I think that they're going to control the game, give him all the usage out of the backfield. 4-point spread, obviously they're close to -200 on the money line as well, so I don't think that's a hot take to say that they're going to control a lot of this game. And then with Jared Goff passing attempts, he is -130 towards the over on most of those major books. But if they're playing from behind, that's going to spur on extra usage for him as well. So we're getting correlation between these three plays, value on the bottom two. Again, if you just took those two for plus 230, I couldn't blame you. But considering that the game script is so big for these two, right, for Derrick Henry to get the rushing usage he needs, it at the very least needs to be a competitive game. Jared Goff, for him to go over his passing attempts, like they can't be playing from 2 touchdowns ahead, right? Like that would not lead to enough passing usage for Jared Goff there. That's why I think it's a no-brainer to kind of throw that Ravens to win on top of it and get that up to a 5x payout on the pick'em sites. It's plus 400 on the sports books, as you guys can see right there. I took it for a slightly smaller wager than what I did for my pick'em exposure. Unit size for me is $250 on a lot of these other prop sites. So I did only take it for $115 over here. But the reason for that is it's a bigger payout, right? It's a 5x payout like you'd be getting on these other pick'em sites, and you want to scale down your exposure based on the payout that you're going with. So those are 3 props, 2 props in particular on the pick'em sites that have already entered at this point. Underdog's probably not the best place to enter it. I mean, that 0.5 is not worth that 0.4x difference with the payout. If you were going to take it on Underdog or Prize Picks, the place to do it would be on the Prize Picks side, but it's a 2-yard difference, a 1-yard difference compared to Hardrock Bet, and that 0.5 difference. If you have access to a sports book, Draftkings, FanDuel, another site that'll let you do a single game parlay like this, that is by far the best spot to go out there and get that exposure. So for all the prop stuff I'm entering, if you guys want to tail every single piece of exposure that I'm entering, make sure to check out the Patreon page for that. There's a prop tier down below that's $15 a month, just like we have for the DFS side, giving you guys access to every single bet that I'm entering for the season. And that's not just the bets, but also all the reasoning behind it. I talk through correlation, trying to find the best value and the best payout available on a lot of these sites as well, and how to find plus EV value in terms of props, whether, it was the over and passing attempts that we got before ended up bumping up. There's an art form to be able to find that stuff before that kind of movement ends up happening. I teach you that process. I give you guys that exposure over on the Patreon page as well. And like I said, for the year, we've had 3 really successful weeks so far. So if you want to jump on the train, start profiting with us over there on the Patreon, link down below is the place to do it. Alrighty guys, that's all I've got for the Monday Night Football preview. Best of luck with all of your exposure this evening. Go ahead, smash that like button if you guys haven't already, and also subscribe to the channel so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. That'll of course include our Thursday Night Football preview, also the main slate for week number 4, and all the season throughout the rest of the season. So I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully we can cash out for all of our exposure this evening, whether it's some props over there with our DFS. Best of luck to everyone else out there, and I'll see you guys throughout the rest of the week.